Hey Sasha, sorry about that.
That's all
We
right.
we've got some technical difficulties here in Detroit, so I
Oh,
solved it. I'm glad to see everybody's still here. Thank you for coming in from the waiting room a few minutes late. I was wondering how many people we might lose in the 3 minutes it took
we
me to
lost
get
that
to the.
background. I don't know what happened, so sorry for that.
So it's okay. It happens. It's a good look though. So
Well,
we
thanks.
Yeah, we wanted to have today be me and you. So I really appreciate the patience. Thanks everybody for joining Now Next Later for Monday, January 13th. And I had been bouncing around. I had like four different screens blinking at me, trying to wait to get in here. So appreciate the patience. But how are you, Sasha?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent, thanks. So now we're into mid-January. One of the things about this episode that I thought was really interesting is I feel like we're just treading water till next Monday, and we're going to get a pretty sizable shift in government resources, attention with this new administration. So when Trump takes office, we're expecting, I think, Doge to have an outsized, excuse me, influence on
Mm.
choices that are made across big agencies, housing being maybe not consolidated, but one of the biggest. And so it almost felt as we were preparing for Now Next Later this week that this week is almost a treading water week to a degree while we wait to see what influenced day one. Historically, presidential candidates, it's been the first 100 days is always a measure for some reason. I don't know if it was like Kennedy that started that or LBJ. Somebody may on the call know and put that in the chat of where the first 100 days came from. If maybe it's FDR. But my point is, I've been saying that I felt like this year it's more like day one than first 100 days. I think first 100 days is going to feel like a year, candidly, with how much is going to change. So I'm really looking at next week, Monday, Tuesday. I think by Tuesday night, we're going to know a lot about what to expect from Doge, what to expect from this administration. Maybe I'm wrong, um, but it feels like it. So I thought we would do a little catching up today on today's episode, if that's all right with you. Anything you are thinking about as a result of some of these changes or preparing your business for the next couple of days?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I think 50%, and then the other 50% of me is like, even though there will be a lot that is indicative of change, we're not going to see that change happen fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, yes,
Mm-hmm.
we're treading water. Yes, we're curious to see some of the initial shifts. Obviously, we all kind of know generally in our industry what a Republican versus Democratic administration feels like. So there are certain things that we can kind of anticipate. But I think a lot of what's going to shift is going to take time. I also think that there is something that I had forgotten about that in a conversation recently I was reminded of that will change everything, which is the um, Tax Cut and Job Act that Trump put in place, I believe, in 2018, is set to expire this year. And so,
Mm-hmm.
in typical political Hill fashion, it feels like everything we think we know might blow up or be different because now everything's going to be on the table. They're going to be bartering and negotiating like crazy. And so, like TBD on what actually falls out, what stays, what's net new, right? What gets killed, stops in
That's
his
right.
tracks. So, again, even though I think we generally have thoughts around what might come, and things that are we feel a little bit more strongly about, right? Like GSE conservatorship exit plan, likely we're going to see, that starts to take form. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we generally know like that one probably will keep going. But there's a lot of stuff that I think is going to be really interesting to be a wait and see on what gets bartered, what gets exchanged, and what the regulatory environment really looks like when the dust settles.
Yeah, that's a really great point, right? There's perception versus reality in the sense of like what is the sort of political talking points versus what trickles down
Yeah.
specifically into our businesses, but just into
Yeah.
our lives, even. Um, I think so. With that in mind, oh, by the way, Michael Kelleher did comment to me in the chat directly that it was FDR. It was the first 100 days in a
Yeah.
presidential radio address, July
Yeah.
25th, 1933. And I
I
think
meant
that
to, I
set a
meant to say
standard.
1933 is a little while ago. I feel like maybe we should update the what is the first set of days.
Exactly. Maybe it is with the speed of everything changing, maybe it's 10 days now. Maybe we've sped up enough
Yeah.
in technology and information. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to ask you today for our listeners,
Yeah.
you know, and this does have to do with speed, regulatory uncertainty, volatility is what's the biggest challenge you see? You know, you have a new role. We talk a lot about data management, data verification on this show, which I know is right in the Zactus wheelhouse. But just for you as Sasha, as the CMO, just in general, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing, practically speaking, right now?
Yeah, and it's gonna sound more lender focused, which I think is right, which is we all don't know what we don't know. And so how can you, whether you are a lender or in my position, tech vendor, show up and be a good partner and be ready to pivot, given that we don't know what we don't know? And I
Okay,
think,
yeah,
for a technology company in particular, I still and have always believed this since I've been in the industry. Anything we can do to take away the day to day minutia that a human doesn't have to be focused on so that they can take their intelligence and focus on more value driven activities, the better. It should theoretically reduce waste, cost, increase efficiency in your business. And so, again, you need a tech partner that gets the volatility, that gets the climate that you're in, that understands the market conditions, what can be controlled, what can't be controlled, but that could also be consultative. That was like a double
I like it.
vibration on that word.
Consultative. Yeah, yeah, I like it.
Consultative. I added a little syllable in there for fun. On like what does that look like now, and then that might change in 6 months. And so how do we again continue to innovate and provide solutions that are nimble, because lenders are going to not know what they don't know, and they can only control so much, and they have to be able to pivot too. And I think that can be challenging, for
Great.
many.
Yeah,
And
so let,
yeah,
let's dive into that because you hit on something that's really practical for me. Well, really two things. One, we talk a lot about consolidation on like the big IMB retail lending side. We
yeah,
don't talk enough about consolidation in the vendor space or in the capabilities space. And then two, you mentioned pivot, which we'll get to. Let's stick for a second on this idea of vendor consolidation. One trend I am seeing is, can I pay once, even if it's more, for more things from
yeah.
one spot? Have you heard from clients, and what would you give? What advice would you give to the vendors on our call, or the service providers, the technology companies on the call, about how to manage that
Yeah.
with your customers? Do you get proactive? Do you have a reactive plan? Any practical tips for like the vendor consolidation we might see or are seeing?
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer it in a little bit of an indirect way, and if I don't get to what you want, you just poke me and I'll try harder. But I would say first and foremost, you got to right size a small IMB versus a large IMB versus a bank versus a credit union. Like it's gonna look a little different for everyone. And so you got to figure out what you need and what works for you. For some lenders, you're going to be more of a buy and build nothing shop. And for some lenders, you're going to be a mixture. We saw Rocket go the complete direction of build everything, and now they've come off of that, right? They're one of our
Mm-hmm.
clients, and they've
Mm-hmm.
now looked at strategies to say, where does it make sense for us to build because it fits our business model, versus we can partner with tech vendors that can be, to your point, a one-stop shop where, and my dad was a contractor, right? So like measure 3 times, cut once, or measure twice, cut once, however you want to say it.
Right.
In this industry, it's like measured 20 times. But I do think that you're going to see lenders want to consider your tech stack in a way of, number one, what do you already have? Like evaluate what you already have that you're not using and you're not getting the value out of. And either the answer is you're not using it and you need to do better. So do better so that you get the value out of it. Or maybe it's time to cut bait and run. Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe we're done with that tech and it's no longer serving its purpose. And then secondarily to that, deciding, do you have capacity, resources to build anything? Do you not? And how do you manage through that? And then when you go to buy new tech, really thinking about two things. One, how do I buy technology that fits, again, right size? And sometimes there are those vendors out there where you are seeing consult. Zactus is a perfect example. We took 8, 9 different companies and combined into one to be able to offer a platform that has multiple commodities, but the richness is in the data and the insights and the decisions that you can make with those commoditized products rather than going to different companies to buy each, right? So look for companies that do have an ability to offer you more than just the average. And then secondarily, I do think the domain expertise matters. You need people that work at a technology company that understand mortgage, understand origination, servicing, cap markets, et cetera, and that understand the challenges that lenders, servicers, et cetera, face day in and day out so that it's working through the edge cases because technology works fine. It's people and process that's a problem. And there's always edge cases with people and process with every loan. And so then you need someone to help you massage that technology with your process to get it flowing in a way where it's working for you.
Yeah, that's a great point. So for differentiators, I think a lot of people like to use experience as a differentiator. And I think sometimes they get, I would say nervous, but that might not be the right word, about pointing out that some of the new technology companies in the space aren't experienced. And so
Mhm.
how you manage that is one really practical tip that I heard that I really like. The other one, you hinted at it, and I'll give a shout out to my friend Frank Fiore because he's the one that
Mm,
put this thought in my head, which is, has your technology been through a cycle? If you built some technology in the low rate sort of lead up where to your point almost every file was vanilla or a rate and term refi, then have you really been tested? And some of these systems that are platforms or newer partners have not been tested in a very difficult environment where all the loans are tough to do or
mhm.
getting tougher. And so I think that's another differentiator to keep in mind. But you mentioned Rocket, so I have to take the bait. I am a Rocket alum, obviously, and Varun Krishna, the new CEO, not new anymore, I guess, but new overall, did an interview on Housing Wire's podcast last week, and Michael Kelleher put it in the chat for me to bring up because Varun mentioned that Rocket wants to be the Apple of home ownership, and obviously that's the title that Diego Sanchez from Housing Wire ran with. But to me, I wanted to talk about it for a couple of reasons, nothing to do with Housing Wire in the podcast, but to really talk about this, which is it it's a bad comp. It's not a good comp for Rocket because Apple has two really special things: the iOS that you can build other cool things on top of, and the hardware that I actually use to access that universe or that ecosystem. Rocket, when I was there, absolutely had the capability to become the iOS of mortgage. In other words, downplay the marketing budget, shift all those resources into a usable, flexible platform that anybody can plug into and do mortgages on, and let other people fight over the retail space, the retail storefront space, or the, I don't mean retail wholesale, guys. Relax. I'm not making a wholesale comment. What I mean is that digital or in the community mortgage broker, retail shop, call center space, you're out there fighting on it. You're using Rocket as your back end. They could have done that. They did not do that. And I don't see the thought process there to do that. I see the thought process of let's continue to spend $900 million more marketing to the American people to be the trusted mortgage source and slowly but surely win over real estate agents in the process. That is what I see. So Apple's actually really not a great fit. But the idea that someone is or wants to try to build the iOS of mortgage, I think is real. I actually think a bunch of people want to be able to offer mortgages and don't want to be forced to fulfill mortgages because it's a pain and it's
Yeah.
complex. And so I really think that that's where we'll see potentially somebody step in and do something a little bit different, which would be like more that like older model refreshed mortgage as a
Yeah.
service, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um, and in that model, you would want these bigger platforms or these bigger vendors doing more of the work because you want to be able to make it flexible.
Yeah, David Wells is saying marketplace. All these ideas are things, and I didn't read the full message that Michael you wrote, but it's like chance passed, right? It's like by the time we come up with a good idea and we're ready to apply it, like the time has shifted.
We're
And
moving
again,
on.
pivot next, right? So it'll be interesting to see as we have what I would call probably another steady Eddie year, hopefully a little bit better than last, but still not going to be an upcycle. What does come into play, and are there some things that are on the precipice of upcycle that start to shift and move in the direction of like times past where we probably should have tried things on and we just weren't ready or couldn't get there. Do we actually get there now? And does that start to transform, or is it going to be, more of the same? But I will say this, and you've heard me make this battle cry before. Lenders have more power than they realize, even if you're smaller, band together. Push on the old school guys to come into the 21st century. We do not need hard coded integrations anymore. Open API structure exists for a reason. So ask for it, ask for easier, you want it to be secure. Obviously, data privacy and data security matters, but there's a way to do that and be smarter about it. And there's a way to leverage data and be smarter about how we're making decisions. And I think lenders have to start to demand it the way that consumers are demanding of lenders a digital experience.
Mhm. And so if I think about that, if I'm a technology company on this, episode, and I'm hearing us, and I'm thinking about how do I treat, I think what I heard you say, but I'm very, how do I treat my lender like a consumer? I mean, that's
Yeah.
really what we're trying to say is we've spent a lot of time, in my opinion, talking about consumers without actually serving consumers. And what you're saying is hold up. Your actual consumer is the lender. Why aren't you treating them like a consumer and giving them the ease of use, and that kind of special experience, for lack of a better way
Exactly.
to put that? We tend to treat B2B as if it's
Yeah.
not worthy of a special experience. We cut corners on some of those things.
Yeah. And is it a cattail, by the way, in the background? Just like popping in and
I was really hoping that the now, next, later slide would actually block it, and then
that's hilarious. And you
just the
know what? It's
tail got
okay.
through.
Just look at there's a cat in my lap right now, so
Oh,
we're good.
look at us. Okay,
See,
there we
you know,
go.
dog's at daycare, and so the cat's like, "Oh, I get mom to myself. This is a whole new experience." But cat's out of the bag. I you got to tread lightly in my world, maybe not so much in yours, because obviously we partner with the big guys, and we need the big guys.
Of
And
course.
it's healthy for us all to be pushed, small, medium, large size technology providers, on doing better for you. It creates more innovation. It creates more competitiveness in the market, which should hopefully only provide a better solution for the consumer, whether that be the lender and or borrower. And so push, 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 push. Bring it. I'm ready. I'm all ears. Call me.
That I agree, and that's why you're on Now Next Later. This is perfect. You're like exactly um, framing up the 2025 question. So one of the things, if they do call you, right,
Yeah.
or we see a
What
flurry of, we do. Let's say we
Sorry.
use this kind of we use this kind of more plateau market for some of those under the hood types of things. What do you think is the biggest what if, or what is the biggest unknown outside of rates, outside the political environment we mentioned, just in terms of like when I sit down and do discovery with a
Yeah.
potential partner who reaches out to me, what's like one or two of the biggest things you ask straight away to try to get at whether this is going to work or not and where they are? How do you think
Yeah.
about that?
I think in general, the questions haven't changed, right? Like it's going to sound like a sales pitch, but the truth is, like, where's your pain? Where are the pain points, right? Where's the blockage? Where's the slowdown? Where's the bottleneck? Where are things not running as efficiently as you would like? Where do you see lots of errors, right? Those are always going to point to where you have opportunity to do some
Mm-hmm.
cleanup, regardless of what that cleanup is. And, that's typically where we start. And I would also say asking curious questions around, depending on the person you're sitting in front of and the type of originator, servicer, et cetera, that they might be. Hey, have you thought about what happened? Like, think about the COVID forbearance situation right now, right? New
Mm-hmm.
administration. FHA, there's some noise around. Are they going to stop this? Kick the can. You can keep adding an extra 90 days to your scenario. Like if you're sitting in front of a servicer, have you thought? I mean, yeah, it's not a ton of volume, but depending on the servicer, it might be a lot of volume. What's going to happen if that comes to a stop and now all of a sudden you got to deal with like back to normal default mode? Have you thought about it? Are
Hmm.
you ready? Like in my world, right? Jury's still out. I'm not sure anyone will really do buy merge at this stage. But I would ask the question, have you thought about it?
Hmm.
Have you tested it? Are you trying it? Have you not even gotten there yet? Right. So I think asking curious questions around what we see coming up in the market, is helpful to start the dialogue in addition to just the general mainstay of where's your pain? Where's the bottleneck? Right. Where are things not moving the way you want to, or you're seeing errors, or you're having lots of buybacks come back in, or QC process is constantly flagging errors, whatever it might be. Like those are typically what you're asking in order to figure out, okay, where do I need to maybe draw a heat map and decide where to focus my attention most?
Yeah, I think that's critical. The two things you mentioned, one, paying more attention to the servicing side and what happens if, being ready for those pivots that you mentioned, but
Yep.
also like that is where, whether it is a intended or unintended consequence, that is where some volume comes from for existing home sales as
Mhm.
well. I don't know how desperate we're going to get.
Yeah.
I was accused recently of being too cynical on the purchase market because I was trying to get everybody to understand just how serious I think the problem is. So I kind of meant to do that, but the reality is like it could make a difference. That, a couple of 100,000 foreclosures is the difference between 4.1 million home sales and 4.3 million home sales, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm obviously not sure what that environment does look like or is going to look like 6 months from now or 8 months from now. But I do think that we have a tendency as humans, and I love it, I love us for it, but we have a tendency to kind of see it how we want it to
Of
happen.
course.
And
Rose-colored
you're saying
glasses.
that's right. And what you're saying is in order to be properly positioned to pivot, you
Yeah.
have to really recognize whether you are naturally cynical or naturally optimistic and what is the opposite thing you should be ready for. And so, running an
But it's
innovation team,
scenario planning, right? I mean, it's back to basics of like business 101. You do scenario planning for a reason so that you can be ready for whatever the scenario is that comes to fruition.
And I was just thinking about that. Like, scenario planning is actually kind of tough in the sense that it costs some time. We have some time,
Yes.
but it costs some time. And you don't know that you're ever going to use that plan that you have on the shelf, but that's why you do it. And so the way I always thought about it at Rocket was, how do we do a project where we get something of value no matter what? And by the way, that's not how all innovation teams work. At Google, Google had a special team in the Google X world where they actually did pure blue sky research and they didn't know where they were going to use it. So I'll give you an example. I got a chance to meet with some Google X folks from Google Cloud, and they wanted to know, how do we make the internet a better place? That was their
Mhm.
mission. How to think about innovation questions that way. And they would do things like they would interview a CIA interrogator,
Oh,
not knowing where they were going to use it. But guess what that person was really good at? Getting to the truth, getting to
yeah.
answer,
Yeah.
understanding how humans think and operate. And so they took that research, they put it on a shelf, and they're like, we may use this someday, we may not. I don't think anybody in our space has that type of freedom with time and resources relative to Google. But what we do have is this
Sure.
ability to run pivot scenarios in
We
less,
do.
more discrete ways. Use the talent in your shop to say, hey, I have a really curious, ambitious person over here. Let's give them
Yep.
some time to run some of these. And as a result, we may actually find the answers to those questions you posed earlier. What's our biggest pain point? Why does this keep frustrating us? Where is it? So I don't think this year, um, I I don't think this year should stop you from doing some internal consulting. I think that is
No,
a good takeaway from today's Now Next Later. Think about how you can use people in your shop already to do some internal consulting and see if you can create some pivot scenarios.
I think you have to. I think I was just on a podcast with Michael Hammond for FinTech Hunting this morning, talking about this exact scenario. And I akined it to a race car. Okay. When we're in an upcycle scenario, we're in a race car, the race has started, it's go, go, go. You don't have time to stop and fix something that you should have fixed when you had the time to do it. If you do, you're going to lose your competitive advantage. So, though I know that it's hard and I know there are still costs and time associated, now is the time to do it. Last year felt like everyone was in trauma mode and survival mode, and there was a lot of contraction and consolidation. And unfortunately, we'll probably still see a little, but generally speaking, I believe this year is stabilization. And in that stabilization year, now is the time to tune up the car and get it ready so that you don't have to slow down when we do hit the upcycle. And that requires you to be more thoughtful, and it requires you to look at, where you made decisions that were reactive and how can you potentially get ahead of that. I mean, no one on this call or in our industry can possibly ever be happy with how much cutting we had to do last year. It's painful. Regardless, you're on mute, by the way. Regardless, which I'm okay with because I can just talk forever. But regardless of what role you play in our industry, the human factor and having to let go of resources is painful. And in order to prevent the risk of doing more of that in the future, now is the time to be strategic and thoughtful. Where can you put technology in place so when it's time to ramp up, you can have your people focused on value activity? And if ever you have to ramp back, and of course, my company will probably hurt me for saying this, but maybe you ramp back on tech instead of people, right? I mean, that's what we should be trying to do is be smarter about how we learn from the cycles and learn from what happened, what went wrong, scenario plan, right? And I don't think it's going to be left on the shelf. I get we don't have resources like Google, but I think that scenario planning is what helps you think about and look at where you've been, where you are, and informs where you need to go next. And you might not be able to pull the trigger on all those decisions, but that is the mark of a good leadership team. A good leadership team should be doing those activities, regardless of how much you can actually pull the trigger on.
Yeah, I can't agree. I couldn't agree more. The key here too is if you do this right, if you do the pivot scenario planning right, when you ramp back up, you're not ramping back up to put people back in their old role. That was last year, 10 years ago's strategy. You have to do this so that when you ramp back up, you're putting those people on net new problems, net new business, net new things that you are capable of doing. That's the only way to expand. Otherwise, you shouldn't bring them back. You should trust technology and you should focus on profitability. Those are the only real two scenarios to live, win, succeed in this business. Is if you bring people back, you have to bring them back on new hard problems, whether that's in servicing, whether that's in business development, whether it's expanding channels or products. But if you just focus on technology, lay people off, and then bring them back to the same role with the technology, you've double spent. And we say it over and over again on this show because you have to say things 7 times before people hear you. Plus, they have to find us and hear this. So we're going to spread the word. But
Look at
reality.
you being a better CMO than me. I love it.
And then lastly, Sasha, we'll close out here with Alan's question from the chat.
Yeah,
Are you
I got to get
finding that
answers
are
on.
you finding that your partners are in a no spend mode, or are you finding your partners are ready for what we're talking about?
I think it's a combo. And I think here's the deal. Like, of course, any lender is not going to want to spend money ever, even in an upcycle, right? Like they will because they're moving fast and they've got to deal with the response and keeping up. But even those that are not wanting to spend, here's the great irony. They will. Why? Because insurance costs are freaking skyrocketing. Like poor California, my home state, is under fire, and the hurricanes in Florida are going to keep coming. We're going to see defaults next year if this forbearance thing times out, right? We've got, I think, 15% default with credit card right now. And oh, by the way, those are your like millennial buyers that need to be buying a home. What happens when they can't pay for their credit card debt, let alone, their home? Like we are going to have more costs and more problems than lenders know what to deal with. So you have to find a way to offset it. And there are ways to offset it with tech. And I know no lender likes to hear this line, but you got to spend money to make money. The question is, how do you do it strategically? How do you find the right partner with the right human and tech intelligence to help figure out where's the best bang for my buck? Where's the best place for me to invest a little so that I can offset those costs and put myself in a position to be as profitable as possible, even if that means less loss, right? Even if we're not hitting that profitability mark yet. Okay, great, but we're not bleeding as much as we were before.
That's right. I think that's exactly the right way to look at it because you got to start somewhere. And so, I was kind of joking earlier about Apple and Rocket, but this Apple commercial's been in my brain since I saw it during football, which is the second Friday in January is Quitters Friday because that's when the most New Year's resolutions are given up. And what I just heard you say was actually, if you stick with the resolution you just described about your business, as you move forward, you will see the gains. And then, even if it's limiting losses, those gains will fuel more pivoting, more thoughtfulness, and then more changes that benefit you to get to profitability. So, we don't see another way out in 2025 than following, these steps.
My
And
word for this year for the industry is liminal. I used that word recently in one of my Monday Magics, and I love that word, and I had forgotten about that word. And it's transitionary. It's the space between, right? And I've had a lot of that in my personal life and professional life, but I feel like it's where the industry is too. We've got that in between space. Use it to your advantage. My friend Craig Davis says leaders don't wait on markets, they make their market. Go make your market this year. There's opportunity. You just got to do the work. You got to find it.
that's a perfect way to end. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on Now, Next, Later. We'll be back next week and talk to you all soon. Thank you. Thanks, Sasha. Take care.
Thanks, Jer. See ya.
Bye.